Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something a bit different, taking a real shortcut, actually.
Yeah, we're skipping the usual broad overview of near-death experiences.
Exactly. Instead, we're dedicating this entire conversation to just one specific, really compelling account. It's filed under Ismael Probable NDE 9450.
That's right. And our mission here is to really distill the journey, the specific things he encountered, and maybe most importantly, the impact this single event had over decades.
Because when you dig into the source material like we did, there are these surprising little details, nuggets that really bring it to life.
And that's what we want to share with you today, those specifics.
Okay, so let's set the scene. The context is pretty crucial here. This happened way back in 2007.
And the person involved, Ismael, he was only 4 years old at the time.
Just 4. He was in the hospital with peritonitis, which is serious stuff, and during surgery, he experienced clinical death.
The NDE itself, the classification it got, was simply entirely pleasant, which, sounds nice, but doesn't tell you much.
Right. But it was what he told his mother, like, immediately after waking up. That was the first real hint that this was something, well, something more than just, say, pediatric delirium.
Yeah, that first description.
He said he felt his body leave the planet. That's quite a statement for a 4-year-old.
And enter a supernatural world, yeah. But the specific phrase he used, it's so visceral. He said he left like a rocket.
Like a rocket. That image, that phrase, that's really our unique way into this particular story.
So let's unpack that ascent for a minute, because it sort of immediately challenges the classic NDE template you often hear about.
The tunnel, you mean?
Exactly. Ismael later said he was uncertain about whether he actually went through a dark tunnel. That's usually one of the first things people mention. Instead, he talks about this really rapid departure, almost like astral travel was the phrase he used later. Accelerating away from Earth so fast he could actually look back and see the planet from space.
Wow. That makes you think about the whole mechanism of separation, right? Like, if the tunnel is some kind of psychological thing or physiological brain shutting down, why would someone else experience a rocket ascent? It's different.
It does raise big questions, yeah, about expectation versus, what's genuinely experienced. But there's another point here that kind of complicates the simple physiological argument.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
It's his reported state of consciousness during this whole thing.
Okay, tell us about that, because you mentioned this is a significant difference from a lot of other accounts we look at.
Well, yeah, most NDE survivors, they talk about this state of hyperconsciousness, super alertness, senses sharper, thoughts faster, knowledge flooding in.
Right, that heightened reality feel.
But Ismael, he reported having just normal consciousness, normal alertness. He didn't feel heightened at all.
Really?
Yeah.
Just normal.
Yeah. And his senses, too, vision, hearing, he described them as completely normal, not more vivid or anything like that.
Huh. That's fascinating. It suggests the experience can still be incredibly profound without that sensory overload component that you hear about so often.
It seems so. So he was just present, fully aware, like a typical 4-year-old as he entered this realm.
Which he was able to identify pretty quickly.
Yes, absolutely. He described the destination as a clearly mystical or unearthly realm. And he knew somehow that it was heaven.
And the feelings.
Pretty much what you'd expect, I suppose. Pure happiness, incredible joy.
Yeah.
And the immediate feeling, the source material confirms this, was that he just did not want to go back.
But that's the crux of it, isn't it? Which brings us right to the moment that really defined the experience for the rest of his life.
The divine encounter.
Yes, and the incredibly specific command that, well, that sent a 4-year-old child back to his life.
Right. So when he talks about meeting God, the details they're really striking. He met a being he described as an elderly man wearing a white tunic.
Okay. Classic imagery in some ways.
Sort of. But he also said he didn't see the face clearly, maybe because of a bright light, which he kind of rationalized later after reading other NDE reports.
But the detail that really lands, the memorable thing, the thing a 4-year-old would probably fixate on, it wasn't the light or the tunic.
It was what he did see clearly. He said, and this is a quote, "What stood out the most were his sandals of the period."
The sandals, that's, wow. That kind of specificity, that focus on the footwear, it just lends this, I don't know, undeniable, almost childish authenticity to this huge supernatural claim.
It totally does.
Yeah.
It anchors this massive mystical event in something completely mundane almost. It makes a story stick in your mind.
Yeah, it really does.
Now, to really get the force behind the command that sent him back, we absolutely have to understand the situation his mother was in. the chaos around
Oh,
her.
oh, right. That family context is so important here. Ismael was 4, his sister was 9.
And they were isolated in that city. Their extended family lived far away in the capital.
And adding just immense stress onto that isolation, their father was away, working in Japan.
Yeah. So his mother was basically alone, dealing with this incredibly sick child who had, for all intents and purposes, just died on the operating table. The emotional weight on her must have been, well, catastrophic.
Unimaginable.
And that is precisely why he was apparently sent back. God told Ismael he had to go back, not because it wasn't his time yet, the usual phrase. No.
No.
It was because his mother was crying so much, and he couldn't leave her alone like that. The reason for return was just pure, immediate, unconditional love for his grieving mom.
That's quite a moment, a staggering reason. And Ismael himself, looking back later,
He reflected that this divine instruction was absolutely for the best. He actually believed that if he hadn't returned, his mother would have sunk into a depression.
so his return was seen as necessary to save her well-being, essentially.
That's how he frames it. And that knowledge, that realization, that's one of the most profound takeaways from the whole thing for him. The core knowledge he gained was, okay, heaven exists, check. He spoke with God, check.
Uh-huh.
And maybe the biggest one, that God loves everyone and, quote, doesn't like to see us suffer. That little seed of universal compassion planted when he was just 4, it really defines the rest of his journey, the conflict and the eventual reawakening later on.
Okay, so now we need to jump forward quite a bit because this is where the human element really complicates the supernatural experience. Part 3 is this great memory lapse.
Yeah, it's a really interesting phenomenon you sometimes see in NDE accounts.
Mm.
The memory isn't always there right away or it's not complete.
And for Ismael,
He didn't remember the event immediately afterwards. Not at all. He only became aware of the story, his own story, around age 10.
10. How did he find out?
Apparently, his basketball teacher, who happened to be a friend of his mother's, just recounted the whole thing to him, what had happened during the surgery years before.
Wow. Imagine having to be told about your own near-death experience. It wasn't even his memory at that point.
Exactly. It was a story told to him, not something he consciously remembered living through.
Hmm.
But then things get even more complicated when he hits adolescence.
Ah, the teenage years.
Right. He was raised Christian Catholic, but by the time he was 16, he hit that classic phase of, well, rebellion and doubt.
Okay. So what did that look like for him?
He started classifying himself as agnostic. He even admitted later that he secretly mocked believers, even while he was still, going through the motions of attending church sometimes.
And the NDE story, the rocket, the sandals, all of it.
That was the ultimate sign of his denial. He rejected it completely. He actually concluded that he must have just invented it as a little kid.
Invented it. Why?
His theory was maybe to get his mother's attention or maybe just to calm her down during that incredibly stressful time. He basically dismissed the experience, the very thing that should have been foundational to his faith, as a childish fabrication, a lie.
That's highly dramatic, isn't it? The ultimate potential proof of the divine, just tossed aside as a manipulative childhood fib. So what could possibly break through that kind of staunch agnosticism?
Well, it took something pretty major. An intense existential crisis in 2021 when he was 19 years old.
Okay.
And the catalyst was an internal reflection initially. It was purely external. He watched the movie Heaven is for Real.
Ah, the movie based on Colton Burpo's NDE account.
That's the one. And watching it, he realized with just astonishment that his own childhood experience, the one he dismissed, was almost the same as the little boys in the film.
And that shock of recognition, seeing the parallels.
It completely floored him. That confirmation caused his life, in his words, to take a complete 360-degree turn. It led him to fully re-embrace belief in God and, crucially, belief in the reality of his own experience from all those years ago.
Wow. A movie turned his life around by validating a forgotten memory. Seems like it. And this reawakening, this rediscovery, it led to what is arguably the most significant lasting change for him. This is kind of the so what of this whole deep dive.
Which is?
A radical shift in his values, particularly regarding other people. This is where that core message from the NDE, the unconditional love, really collided head-on with his upbringing.
Okay, explain that tension a bit more.
Well, he stated very explicitly that he was raised within a religious framework where he came to believe that certain groups, he mentioned atheists, homosexuals, Muslims, were despised by God. and would face punishment. That was the cultural lens he had on faith.
Pretty judgmental stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the core memory of his own experience, the NDE itself, directly contradicted that.
How so?
That memory of the encounter with God, that overwhelming feeling of unconditional love he felt. And specifically the reason he was sent back, because his mother, who wasn't seen as particularly devout by their family standards, was crying. That provided an immediate visceral rebuttal to that whole judgmental framework.
Ah, I see. The experience itself was the counter-evidence. Exactly. So now, he believes God gives that same universal, unconditional love to everyone, full stop, and that we all have a purpose in life, regardless of our background, beliefs, orientation, whatever. Rediscovering the NDE essentially shattered his previous, much more exclusive worldview.
That's a profound transformation. So moving into our synthesis now, let's talk about his current view on the reality of the experience itself. He went from probably not real as a teenager,
Right, thinking he made it up.
to now believing it was probably real. What cemented that shift back to belief in its reality? Why the certainty now?
It really seems to come back to that moment of astonishment, that pattern recognition. The realization that as a 4-year-old kid with zero prior knowledge or cultural context about NDEs, he had an experience that was so remarkably similar, so consistent, with literally thousands of other accounts from completely unrelated people.
So seeing his story echoed in others' experiences was the key.
Yeah, that recognition, sparked by reading and watching other testimonies like the movie, that seems to become the ultimate proof of its veracity for him.
Okay. But, and this is important, despite this renewed conviction, and despite the really radical positive change in his values towards love and acceptance, belief doesn't suddenly, provide all the answers, does it?
Not at all.
He still has some pretty significant theological questions that linger, which honestly makes him sound incredibly relatable.
Oh, absolutely. The NDE gave him what he feels is a fundamental truth, that universal, unconditional love, but it didn't just magically solve all the major theological puzzles humanity has wrestled with for centuries.
Like what specifically? What doubts remain?
Well, he mentions still having doubts about the traditional concept of hell, for instance, about reincarnation, about the possibility of life on other planets or maybe in other dimensions or universes, and significantly about the validity of different religions.
So it sounds like his personal revelation about love is now actively clashing with some of the more rigid doctrines he might have grown up with or encountered.
That seems to be exactly it. Like, how does he reconcile this powerful experience of universal divine love with, say, the existence of different faiths or doctrines about exclusivity?
Does he talk about that conflict?
Yeah, he mentions struggling intensely with what happens to people outside of Christianity, things like the return of Jesus or the rapture. These are topics that are sources of complexity and uncertainty for him now.
So the NDE affirmed divine love, but it didn't exactly provide him with a neat, systematic theology textbook.
Precisely. It's like he's left holding this profound, simple truth about love, but he still has to navigate all these complicated, often man-made religious structures and ideas. It really highlights how NDEs often seem to be revelations of spirit, maybe, more than revelations of specific doctrine.
That's a great way to put it. So if we had to boil it all down, after all the doubt and rediscovery, what remains the absolute most significant, meaningful core of the experience for him? Above all, the theological head-scratching.
It always comes back to the unconditional love. That's the anchor. And he points to the most specific, concrete example of that love in his experience.
Which was?
The fact that God was worried about his mother. His mother, who, again, by his family's own standards at the time, wasn't considered a particularly devout Catholic. That specific moment demonstrated definitively for Ismael that God's love overrides human rules, doctrines, and judgments.
Love trumps doctrine. Powerful stuff.
Okay, before we wrap up, we should touch briefly on that common question after NDEs, the idea of special gifts or abilities. Did this experience leave him with anything psychic or unusual in that way?
He's very uncertain about that, actually. He doesn't make any big claims. He does mention, almost as an aside, that on a very few occasions he thinks he's dreamed of future events.
Oh.
Yeah, dreams that then subsequently happened exactly as they did in the dream. But he doesn't lean heavily on this detail at all. It just remains an interesting kind of unresolved thread hanging off the main experience. Okay. So, not a major focus for him. This whole arc, though, thinking about it, an event at age 4, forgotten, then denied as a lie during those tough teenage years, only to be rediscovered and embraced later in life. It's just such a powerful illustration of how these core experiences can fundamentally reshape an adult's entire perspective.
Absolutely. And in his case, the rediscovery didn't just reaffirm a belief in God. It did something much more radical. It shattered a previously held judgmental worldview and replaced it with this idea of universal, unconditional love.
Which leads us perfectly into our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on after this.
Right, so consider this. Ismael's experience, which he came to believe was a direct connection to the divine, fundamentally moved him away from a religious viewpoint that, in his understanding, despised and condemned certain groups, atheists, Muslims, homosexuals.
Right.
The NDE itself is credited with pushing him towards this radical acceptance, this universal love.
So the question is,
if the divine message, as experienced so powerfully by Ismael, is one of total, unconditional love for all people, what does that imply about our human interpretations of divine judgment, exclusion, and condemnation? That's the complex, maybe uncomfortable question we'll leave you to mull over today.
Thank you for listening to Borrowed Time NDE Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss a moment of inspiration. Until next time, wishing you an extraordinary and truly wonderful time on your journey through life.